Thank you for calling Dangerous Liaisons. For Candy, press 1. For Sandy, press 2. For Mona, press 3. You press 3 for Mona. Hi, this is Mona. What's your name?
I just need someone to talk to.
Honey, this is a phone sex line. All we do is talk.
Right. How do you fix something like that? How do you make amends? I thought it would help, but it only made it worse.
Just give me your credit card number and I can listen to you all night.
Killing them all only made it worse. It didn't bring them back.
Hey, what are you, some kind of weirdo?
Sorry. Sorry.
Yin and yang, hot and cold, heads or tails, one and the same, but very different at the same time. It happens quite a lot wherever you look. For every reality TV show that gets made, you get a romantic comedy released in theaters. But both deal with topics of interpersonal relationships and try to encapsulate real life in a way that entertains audiences. But these two things couldn't be more different from one another. Reality TV shows 9 times out of 10 are cheap productions funded by TV studios who need to pad out the showings between their popular shows. So these programs get made and then are slotted at 3:30 time slot on MTV or somewhere or another. But what about that 10th time out of 10? A reality TV that is educational like Anthony Bourdain's show, A Cook's Tour. I've seen some of the show and I can say that Bourdain has a unique take on cooking, and he often took the show to local restaurants that you'd never normally see on television. What about romantic comedies? The 40-Year-Old Virgin is considered a classic in the genre. I can't really say for certain as I'm not versed in the genre. But what about the dozens of movies in the same genre that have gone by the wayside because of their quality? The same thing can happen to two distinct things that people associate with either good or bad, and it's not just in these two examples that I gave. It can be found everywhere. Just know that even if something is perceived as something in most cases, it is not as black and white, but rather shades of gray, as the tired expression goes. But it rings true. Anyway, what am I even talking about? Initially, I wanted to explain how something that is the same can be so different, but did I really get my point across? Probably. Depends. Did you get my confusing analogy of two things that have nothing to do with this video? I did get my point across though. Things are never what they seem, and two things that seem the same can be fundamentally different. And nothing, even if put in the same boat, should be classified as something quote unquote like this other thing or that other thing. Everything is unique as the nature of things. Quote, more than one way to skin a cat, unquote, sort of ordeal. But I thought I was talking about the nature of similar things being different. That saying means that there's more than one way to approach a similar task. What is this video about anyway? Why am I listening to some guy ramble about vague nonsense? I'll tell you why. Because that is what the video is exactly about. Mad Max and Max Payne, two fundamentally same characters who are different, but achieve the same thing they set out to accomplish. This video is about comparing two very similar characters who have widely different settings and tones, while still achieving what they want to say in their narratives, the tale of two Maxes. First and foremost, we must establish a baseline for these characters, give some context to what they are and who they are. Max Rockatansky is the titular character for Mad Max, an apocalyptic movie franchise that is helmed by George Miller, while Max Payne is a video game developed by Remedy Entertainment and subsequent entry developed by Rockstar Vancouver, which takes place in New York and subsequent entry in Sao Paulo, Brazil. There is much more to discuss about these settings which I will get into, but this is surface level knowledge that I need to lay down as not to confuse anyone. Furthermore, I will be referring to Max Rockatansky as Rockatansky and Max Payne as Payne, referring them with their last names because it would be pretty confusing if I just kept saying Max this and Max that, when you wouldn't know who I am referring to. To summarize, Mad Max is a movie franchise and Max Payne is a video game series. And with this, let us begin with Max Rockatansky in the world of George Miller's Mad Max. Mad Max was released in 1979. It was created by George Miller and Brian Kennedy, as stated in Wikipedia, and stars Mel Gibson as Max Rockatansky. Rockatansky is a husband and father, while also being in the main force patrol, who according to the Mad Max wiki, was established from the remnants of the Australian government to combat the savages on the continental highways. What is cool about this is that in the opening sequence of the film, you get to see Rockatansky's car's name, which is the Interceptor, and that is pretty dope moment, in my opinion anyway. Right off the bat, the audience is taken into this world that isn't quite post-apocalyptic yet, only because the apocalypse is still going on. Meaning, you have a cop in a world that is on the brink of collapse, enforcing loose laws on people who kill and raid on motorcycles. As much as I love the world building of Mad Max, I'm going to focus on the titular character of Max Rockatansky. Max is wary of being on the force, for he feels that the road is calling him, and he is becoming more and more like the crazies that terrorize the roads. He also probably wants to nurture his daughter and have quality time with his wife, Jessie, for that is one of the few things that remain normal in this abnormal world. Unfortunately, his best friend Goose is left burned and heavily disfigured, while his daughter is killed and Jessie is left gravely injured. Something that isn't specified is if Jessie actually dies, but because she isn't present in any other movie, it's safe to assume that she is meant to die in the attack by the bikers. So you have a cop that has had his wife and daughter killed by goons he later gets revenge on. Now, where have I heard that before? Max Rockatansky is characterized in this film as a cop, or bronze in the case of the first movie, who is good at their job, but fears that he's becoming more and more like the psychotic savages he hunts down on a day-to-day. To counteract this, he makes sure that his wife and daughter have a heavy presence in his life, and they act as a link to sanity. However, since this link is broken, Rockatansky is forced to wander the wasteland, fully embracing the savage lifestyle of the road. Something I have to explain that is true for both Max Rockatansky and Max Payne is that even though they have multiple entries in their series, they are characterized differently between the entries. Rockatansky has 3 different characterizations, while Payne only has 2. Rockatansky's characterization can be broken down into 3 different types. Mad Max, the first iteration of the character, the cop who struggles between the call of the road and being a loving father and husband, who gets his family snatched away by the very thing that Rockatansky fights every day. This characterization is different from the Road Warrior of the second and third film because Rockatansky morphs into somebody who wanders wherever the sands take him, only helping when he absolutely needs to. And finally, the third iteration of the character, which is also the newest with the Fury Road reboot. The Fury Road characterization of Max is a combination of the two, incorporating elements of both. I think it's important to understand the second characterization of Rockatansky before explaining the most known version of the character. Max Rockatansky in the second film is someone who is struggling to survive, whose days of being an agent of the law are over, and is only looking for more gas to keep his never-ending quest of wandering the waste going. The odd thing is that in the second and third movie, the fact of Rockatansky's wife and daughter being slaughtered are not that present within the film. Sure, it can be interpreted by Max's interactions with certain characters like the Pharaoh Kid and the entirety of the gas settlement that he is actively trying to amend the sins he has casted on himself with the death of his family. But what actually comes off is that Rockatansky hasn't let the death of his family affect him that much. Instead, he acts like another person in the wasteland trying to survive, like the gyrocopter captain, but Rockatansky has a killer V8 muscle car, rest in pieces by the way, the last of the V8 interceptors, and is more competent than the average wastelander, able to handle himself in a fight. Mad Max, the Road Warrior, is the movie that establishes Rockatansky's common activity throughout the rest of the films, which is his tendency to help those who need it even though he doesn't want to. In the first movie, Rockatansky never did anything on behalf of him wanting to do it, with the exception of killing those who killed his family, because he was on the MFP. That was his job, to uphold the law, so in a sense it could be said that Rockatansky was a good guy who wanted to help people. However, like the death of his family affecting him in the second movie, it isn't something that the audience can easily pick up on. However, in the second movie, Rockatansky does offer to help those in need, for a fee at first, but then after he is nearly killed and things become personal between him and the Humongous, then he offers to help with no strings attached. The same can be said in the third film, where the lack of any real signs of trauma from the death of his family persists, but also that he helps Auntie in Bartertown for a fee. and in this case, it would be more of a gun for hire because of the circumstances that Auntie finds herself in as compared to the gas settlement in Road Warrior. However, with the Lost Tribe, Rockatansky once again helps because there is a good in helping the kids who have waited for Captain Morgan for years. The third film's characterization of Rockatansky is much sleazier than the other films because Rockatansky openly accepts the conditions of killing a man, although the film justifies it and calls it lawful because it is combat within the Thunderdome. However, Rockatansky doesn't kill his target because Auntie lied to him about Blaster's Down syndrome. Overall, in the second iteration of the character, Max Rockatansky is a man who wanders a wasteland trying to survive, as he stumbles into circumstances he'd rather avoid but ultimately chooses to help those in need, and the story ends relatively happily. Max Rockatansky and Fury Road is a combination between the Rockatansky seen in the first film with the character of the second and third film. This is a reboot of the series, so maybe George Miller decided to just combine everything up to this point in order to create this vision of Max Rockatansky. For example, Fury Road's Max Rockatansky is haunted by not only the death of his wife and daughter, as clearly established with the opening shot of the movie where he hears the voices of his daughter specifically, but of all the people he couldn't save. This version of the character has been given a form of survivor's guilt, so to say, because he is haunted by the people he couldn't save with the voices in his head telling him that he failed saving them. So my main gripe about the second version of Rockatansky, the obvious lack of trauma from having his family killed, is present and at the forefront of this version of the character. However, the one thing I don't like about the Fury Road Max in the second and especially the third film, Rockatansky is very vocal about what is going on and he will normally talk before resorting to violence. And beyond Thunderdome, he is also able to infiltrate Master Blaster's pig energy farm and find out Blaster's main weakness, which requires some tenacity and espionage in my opinion. In the second film, Road Warrior, Rockatansky strikes a deal with the gas settlement for gas in exchange for a semi-truck. So it shows that he is able to use his words and not resort to fighting and killing anything in his path. However, in Fury Road for a majority of the movie, Rockatansky is very silent and expressive using his body, which is a more physical way of communication that may help the tone and aesthetic of the reboot series. This is in fact a world that is more violent and savage than the other films. So having a Rockatansky that talks more instead of throwing his weight around might have been odd. And furthermore, Rockatansky does have moments where he discusses plans with Furiosa, specifically when he lays out the plan to take the Citadel instead of trying to cross the Plains of Silence. Since this is a reboot, some things needed to change with the Rockatansky becoming a much more physical person. Probably also due to the fact that Tom Hardy was the new Max Rockatansky, and he is more physical than Mel Gibson. George Miller probably leaned into that more savage primal being, as the tone of the entire movie was more barbaric than the other films. A quick tangent before we conclude with Max Rockatansky. Fury Road is the best movie in the franchise because it encapsulates everything that this series is about. A lone wanderer who gets himself into a plot that he did not want to be in, eventually helping out and making the underdog succeed, punctuated with explosive action and a villain that looks grotesque. In many ways, Fury Road is a true success to the Road Warrior because Beyond Thunderdome is very light on the blood, and I'm almost positive that no one explicitly is killed like in Road Warrior or Fury Road. Beyond Thunderdome is the black sheep of the series in my opinion, but it is still a solid entry that does show the events of the nuclear bombs dropping. In any case, there are three main forms of the character known as Max Rockatansky. The cop that wanted to be with his family but was ultimately called back to the road and forced to wander with thoughts of regret and guilt. The wanderer of the wasteland who kept moving not knowing why, but stumbled onto people that he helped as a form of penance. And finally, the savage with voices of the dead that haunt him as he wanders the waste in search of anything, eventually finding some reprieve and helping those who reminded him of himself. Three very distinct characters that achieve the same goal of being a vessel for the audience in these movies, but also having personal motivations and character arcs. However, that isn't the full story. Now we must examine Max Payne, the other side of this coin, and see how he is characterized in his games. Max Payne was released in 2001 by Remedy Entertainment, and it follows Max Payne as he fights his way through the Mafia and ultimately a giant government conspiracy as he gets revenge for the death of his wife and daughter. This parallels Max Rockatansky, not only in the fact that they both lost their loved ones. However, for Rockatansky, it was at the end of the movie, while Payne's loss was established at the beginning. But also that they both enforced the law. Max Rockatansky being a pursuit unit in the fictional MFP, while Max Payne being on the New York Police Force and DEA. The death of Payne's family is a core part of his character in the first game, and it is his entire motivation for going on his revenge quest against the Mafia and the creators of the drug Valkyr. Because we take control of Payne 3 years after the death of his family, we see a man who is bitter and spiraling out of control, so deep undercover that he takes a rebellious and somewhat hostile position against the police and SWAT, although he never does kill any enforcement, just sticking it to the Mafia and PMC goons sent his way. The one place you get to learn about Payne and the way he thinks is the internal monologue and narration throughout the game. This is a video game after all, meaning that the writers, in this case Sam Lake, have a lot more time to develop and flesh out Payne as he progresses through the events of the game. Since you can put Payne in a much more varied environment, it lets the character respond and ultimately develop naturally as compared to a movie where the setting is fixed and the characters have boundaries placed on them for character development. This relates to the notion of video games as an ultimate media for depth in narrative, since you have so many avenues that you can tell the story and maintain the freshness of it. Because if you exposition for too long in a movie, that can drag out the pacing and make it feel bloated and boring. But in a video game, you can put world building details in the environment of the game itself, like Max Payne does with its TV shows, and it doesn't feel unnatural because it makes the world feel alive. However, that is a tangent and discussion for another time. The media comparison between video games and films is a long and arduous discussion that isn't the point of this video. To conclude, Payne is a cop bent on revenge who goes to great lengths to avenge his family by killing those who wronged him. All the while, Payne suffers from haunting memories of the day that he discovers his baby and wife dead at the hands of Valkyr addicts. At the end of the story, it is left ambiguous, with certain characters presumed dead and the story abruptly ending, but the characterization of Payne in the first Max Payne and the second game, Max Payne 2, The Fall of Max Payne, are very similar because the second game happens soon after the conclusion of the first. Max Payne 2, The Fall of Max Payne, as the title suggests, is about Max Payne falling, so to speak. I know how to make that assessment. Let me explain. Max Payne in this game is falling, slipping down a hole that he himself has dug because of his actions. Payne falls in love with Mona Sachs, but feels guilty about his dead wife. Even though she has been dead for 3 years, and it will be normal and healthy for Payne to look for another romantic interest, he decides that the best course of action will be to have feelings for a woman who is a known assassin and almost tried to kill him in the previous game. Yes, I know, she did save him at the end of the first game, taking a gunshot to the head for him, but still, out of all the women that Max Payne could have started to love again, he chose the most dangerous option. This leads to Payne getting roped into an internal power struggle that he had no reason to be involved in. The second game is very similar to the first game, which might be due to the fact that it has the same writer, Sam Lake, continuing the story and leading it to its natural conclusion, which is Payne finally accepting the death of his wife. However, that ending is more nuanced than I can really rightfully say what the ending is. Payne did just witness the death of another woman in his life that he loved, and he is smiling at the end of it. It's almost as if he's lying to himself about really closing that chapter of his life. I could characterize Payne in this game as a lonely man who's still feeling the guilt of his past, looking for an out, something to get his mind off of everything that has just happened, and ultimately there is no conclusive ending to this version of the character. The events of the ending can be taken literal. Max Payne does stop Vlad and resolves the case. Mona is dead, but Max has accepted the fact that he has to eventually move on from his wife and daughter. But you see the problem with that? Payne should be upset at the death of Mona, but the story really isn't saying that he is, because Mona does die within the last 10 minutes of the game. So maybe Remedy ran out of time, or I am missing something that should be obvious, which would make this whole section of the video pointless, but I digress. The key takeaways are that Max Payne is very similar between the first two games. However, some aspects are changed to fit the narrative of the second game more, and as natural development from the first game, it's obvious that people do not remain stagnant between important events in their lives. New studio means new writers, which means a new story for Max Payne. Another similarity between the two franchises of this video is that they both have a period where nothing came out and eventually resulted in a soft reboot of the series. Max Payne 3 was released after 9 years, while Mad Max Fury Road was released after 30 years in hiatus. And I'm talking about mainline entries like movies for Mad Max and video games for Max Payne. Some might say that Max Payne 3 is not a reboot, but I would classify it as such because of the large time gap between the second and third entry, and the shift of tone and narrative style among other things. There's also a large use of cutscenes in the third game, which is new for the series, as it relayed the majority of its narrative in comic book style sequences. Max Payne 3 is a heavier game compared to the others, which some might say is good, others will claim that it is a departure from the previous games. This change resulted from the change in writer and style. While Sam Lake wrote the first two games, Michael Unsworth and Rupert Humphreys wrote the dialogue for the third game. Their other projects include various GTA games and Rockstar projects, but the important thing to note is that they are writing for Rockstar Games, which has a distinct style. That distinct style is usually people being assholes to each other and being very rude and cynical, which Max Payne is oozing cynicism in this game. Writing taste is subjective, just like how enjoying different foods and different genres of music or television is subjective. There is always a possibility of trying to objectively explain why something is better than something else, but in this case, the writing only matters if it makes the characters or story worse, which in my opinion it doesn't. Instead, it makes the story of Max Payne more personal in my opinion, because Max Payne is shown to be a deadbeat, has been caught wasting the days at a bar drinking and taking pills because he doesn't have the strength to get over his past. The moment in the beginning where you see Payne enter his apartment and immediately start drinking up to the point where he throws the picture of his wife and daughter across the room before picking it up is so impactful to me. And again, this might be subjective. I've always enjoyed the down on his luck, high-functioning alcoholic in movies and TV because broken people always resort to a means of escaping what haunts them, and in this case, Payne escapes the guilt he has by being so drunk that he can't even think about it. This also leads into why Payne is quite rude in this game as well. One reason is that the drugs and whiskey are making him a bit sour, but also in the second half of the game, he has set himself on the path of sobriety, and even claims about having a hangover sent direct from Mother Nature. There are some things that are hinted at from the previous games like Mona Sachs and the Valkyrie case, but the third game is focused on Max Payne moving on from his past. Was that sort of the story in the second game? Yes, but Max Payne 3 takes it a step further by moving Payne away from New York and New Jersey to sunny Brazil. This game is all about Payne reconciling with his past. The game is told in a non-linear way to emphasize that, along with telling the larger narrative. But it can be said that the visiting of the Payne gravesite was a metaphor for Payne saying goodbye for real this time. Max is a more flawed character in this game, which humanizes him. Instead of being the cop seeking revenge or a lonely man seeking love again, he is the man that is clinging to the past and destroying himself as he does it, only for the circumstances that he finds himself in, forcing him to change and move on, to walk into the sunset with shades on and sober. I could rave on and on as to why this is my favorite game in the franchise, but that isn't the point of this video. What is important is that the characterization of Max Payne in the third game is a coarse one, being that Max Payne is shown struggling with substance abuse and being racked with guilt compared to the more romanticized version found within the second and first game. However, through the course of the game, he comes to grow and move on, literally having a soda on a beach on an island off the coast of Brazil, living his life in the moment instead of the past. You can also note that this is better for Payne because all the sections in Jersey are dark, dirty, and cold, while the ending beach on the island is sunny, warm, almost as if Payne escaped his purgatory of New England and rests now in an equatorial beach. Overall, as compared to Max Rockatansky, the character of Max Payne has two distinct characterizations. It can be argued that it's 2.5, but for simplicity's sake, Max Payne has two different characterizations as compared to Max Rockatansky's with 3. Not that the context has been laid out, I can start discussing the whole point of this video. Why and how two drastically different stories can produce two fundamentally similar characters and still achieve success with those characters. Max Rockatansky and Max Payne have the same character background. They are both involved in organizations that serve as the enforcers of law for their societies. They both have a wife and daughter, and ultimately they both lose what they love and are forced into trials which they overcome and eventually grow. However, these two very similar characters find themselves in diametric settings. For the first two games, and some of the third, Max Payne is set in New York City, or how the game sometimes refers to it as Noir York City. The city is dirty, dark, and cold. The first Max Payne is set during a blizzard, reinforcing the fact that the city is unfeeling and borderline hostile towards its inhabitants. which plays well with the first and second game as they both have people trying to kill Max Payne. It's only the third game where the environment becomes a bright sunny paradise set in Sao Paulo, Brazil. This is just an illusion, however, because the paradise that Max Payne thought he was in is actually a gilded city with a glamorous exterior that you peel back bit by bit until you see the rotten core that it harbors. Now compare modern day, albeit stylized, versions of real life cities to Mad Max's apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic Australia, where the sun is always beating down on the characters and the sand is endless. The world has collapsed and the people who are left are trying to escape the clutches of Mr. Death, while not only having to brave the elements but also their fellow man. Because the wastelands lends credence to those who lose their minds, giving them a platform to become crazed warlords to spread savagery in the remnants of the world. Unlike Max Payne and the first movie in the series, there are no changes of setting in Mad Max, only pockets of greenery that are scarce, precious, shown to the viewer that often revolve the plot in some way. The majority of the world is sand, with the plains of silence, in my interpretation, being the Pacific Ocean drying up and covering the majority of the world, a fitting name for our world, which has gone silent as a result of the incompetent governments destroying each other, because when the violent human race finally destroys itself, then Earth will finally know silence. As a component that disrupts its harmony and its sanctuary is humans, and that is something that is shared between these two series, the exploration of the human psyche. Although exploration of the human condition is not explored in every entry of both Mad Max and Max Payne, there is still something that can be inferred from these two stories. In Mad Max, it's primarily Payne's character and thought process that gets tested, and he leads the discussion of his ideology in his world, letting the player know that he thinks what is right and what is wrong. This could be that this type of philosophical discussion directly at the audience is something that Max Payne's main inspirations, noir films, do, and so the game emulates it. But Payne still does question why he does things and comments on certain events, with one-liners and such, but still giving a profound commentary. Meanwhile, like I mentioned earlier with the Wasteland, giving the opportunity for crazed individuals to spread their wings and become the definitive version of themselves, Mad Max also has deeper discussions of what tragedy at a global scale can do to people. In the video game released in the same year as Fury Road, the opening cinematic gives context to the story of Mad Max. But what I want to highlight from this opening cinematic is the line, "Those who survived, those are the truly broken."
The dead will not suffer the hardships of the terrible world which remains. Those born into this hell have no remembrance of anything else. Those who survived, those are the truly broken, for they know what was before.
There are many angles of interpretation that can be derived from the Mad Max franchise. Either you view it as a simple action movie set in the post-apocalypse, which follows an action hero who drives fast and beats up bad guys, or more interestingly, you can view it as the creation of a hero myth by the people who have lived through the calamity of their nuclear explosions, converting the world to a giant sandball. This line of thinking is pretty solid in my book, because the second and third movie are set up as recounting the events that happened long ago, with the feral boy in the second movie telling the story of the road warrior, who saved him in the third movie, having the kids who left the Oasis and moved to the husk of Sydney telling the story of Captain Morgan and of Max Rockatansky. Humans need somebody who is strong and mythological to guide them, whether that be a god, a king, or a god king. Whether it may be when hard times fall upon people, they need something to inspire hope. And wouldn't it be perfect if the story of a man who lost everything, but still roams the wasteland, letting fate take him where he is needed in order to help the good people and kill those who do wrong, be a perfect fit for this situation? I haven't even mentioned the fact that the story of the video game makes Rockatansky a messiah figure. But what does philosophical discussions in an otherwise non-philosophically provocative medium have to do with why the characters of Max Payne and Max Rockatansky are so similar? Oh right, I almost forgot. Simply put, the reasons why these two characters are so similar is because they are just character archetypes. What motivates someone more than the death of their family? Also, what gets audience invested into a narrative more than a dramatic and tragic death of an innocent person who had a strong emotional connection to our lead character. The character type of having lost a wife and daughter, or both, are so common you probably can come up with 3 examples off the top of your head of characters who are similar to Max, who are similar to Max Payne and Max Rockatansky. The thing is, this doesn't matter or is something that should be negatively critiqued, because if used properly as shown in these 2 examples I have delved into, then character archetypes act as springboards in which you can create interesting and entertaining characters for your story. I must confess that I did lie to you, viewer. This video was never about discussing how 2 characters can be the same, but be in a completely different scenario. All I wanted to do was to talk about Max Payne and Max Rockatansky, and I'm sorry that I duped you. But if you manage to get anything out of this video, make it this. Fantastic characters can be one and the same through multiple franchises, mediums, so be it. The point is that everywhere you look are characters that resonate with you and belong to stories that you value wholeheartedly. Because what you like should be precious and important to you, no matter what anybody tells you. Thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and thank you for putting up with my ramblings. And as always, goodbye.
And on that note, birthdays are like regrets. They just keep coming. Each one a new scar that slows you down and drags you closer to your grave.